Yo, what's up, guys? DFS Dude's back for another edition of the Deep Dive. Today is July the 24th. Nice 11-game slate to get into. All of the top pitchers should be on the slate tonight. And there is baseball back. There's baseball going on here in a few minutes. Atlanta is going to be on the slate. Not on the main slate, but Atlanta is playing baseball today at 1:10. So 1:10 Pacific, 4:10 Eastern time. So you can get a little early baseball action in. But last night, didn't anticipate. I did mention there was weather. I thought that the weather would kind of pass through before the game started. That game ends up getting cut short. You need to have Scherzer really in your lineup to take down. Cueto, exactly what we talked about. That Dodgers lineup is going to need. You're going to have a pitcher going against that lineup that can keep the guys in that lineup off balance. And Cueto did that, but only for 4 innings, and then they pulled him. So I don't know what in the blue hell is going on with, or is going to go on in San Francisco. A couple of strange things happened in that game last night. One of them was Cueto only going 4 innings and looked fairly sharp. The ground ball rate we talked about on yesterday's podcast came to fruition. You saw Cueto get ground ball after ground ball when he needed it. Only 2 really medium contact balls. Both of them were 2-out doubles, one by Seager, one by Muncy. But he kept them off balance. He pitched well. On the flip side of it, Derek May, again, another guy, he goes out only 4 innings. May has really good stuff. And if you watched the game last night, hopefully you were able to see that he showcases a 97-plus fastball. Really good movement on a breaking pitch. Really, he's a power pitcher, but only 4 innings there, and really was able to work himself out of some trouble and limit the opportunities the Giants had, which they did have a couple of opportunities to put a crooked number on the board, and they just didn't do it. I think the other big story from last night is the Yankees and how in shape that entire team looks, right? I mean, Stanton looks probably 15 pounds lighter and just looks like he's in better shape. And right out the gate, Yakums for him. So 2-game slates, just, if you're new to the podcast going forward, I'll talk a little bit of strategy. 2-game slates are GPP slates because you need high exposure to 4 teams. I think the 3-game slate is a better slate than the 2-game slate, but, when are you going to see 2-game slates going forward? You're going to see them, maybe on a Sunday night where they'll do the matinee kind of Sunday night 4 o'clock game, and then they'll do an 8 Eastern game together. But typically we don't see the 2-game slate often. We see it in NBA all the time, but we don't see it in MLB. We see the 3-game slate. And if you've listened to this podcast over the last year and a half, the 3-game slate's my wheelhouse. I love that. And the reason is because you can get so many different combinations with your 150 lineups to kind of cover your bases for every scenario. And then when you get into how you take a tournament down using leverage, using field leverage, using ownership leverage, the 3-game slate is kind of the sweet spot. Tonight we've got 11, and there's a couple of questions in our Discord chat that I want to address, and that's the stacking concept. And I know the question was, is it smart to only build your lineup with 2 teams? And my answer in short is yes, it's extremely smart. And what I would say is, the follow-up to that is, are we talking for cash or are we talking for GPPs? If it's for cash, you can play a little different and get away with not stacking up 2 or 3 teams in your lineup. But the one-off approach, if you think about it, a really good hitter in baseball is a 300 hitter. So 3 out of 10 times he gets a hit. You're going to load your lineup with 8 position players that you need them all on the same night to go 3 for 4 or 3 for 3 or 2 for 4. Somebody, 3 or 4 of those guys are going to have to hit a home run. And the reason you need that is because baseball is so dependent on correlation. The success of some is predicated on the success of others. And you need guys to get on base. You need guys, if Bryce Harper is going to get all the credit in an MVP race because he hits, has 100 RBIs and hit 40 home runs. People had to get on base. So in DFS, we want those points too. So the difference would be if, let's use this Bryce Harper example. If Bryce Harper hits a 3-run bomb and you don't have a Philadelphia stack, but you've got Bryce Harper only as a one-off play, you get 25 points for the 3-run homer, thereabouts. And that's perfect, right? It's 25 points. But let's say that in front of him, let's say McCutchen gets on, and McCutchen he walks. There's 3 points. And let's say he steals second base. Okay, there's 6 more points. Now he's at second base and he's got you 9 points. And let's say you've got, say, Jay Bruce or JT Realmuto. And because it's the open base, they pitch around Realmuto, not intentionally, but not giving him anything to hit, and he walks. Okay, there's 3 points for him. So now with this stack, we've collected 9 points from McCutchen, and we've collected 3 points from Realmuto. So we're at 12 points. And now Harper hits the 3-run bomb. We're going to get 3.2 points for McCutchen, putting him at 15.2. We're going to get 3.2 points for Realmuto. For both those 3.2 points are for scoring, right? They scored. So now Realmuto's at 6.2, and you're going to get the 25 or 27 points for the 3-run bomb from Harper. So that's why you want it. That's why it's smart to stack up 1 or 2 teams in your lineups, right? That's why it's smart. Now, taking it a step further, if you're gonna play 1 or 2 lineups, I would not recommend, under any circumstances for any sport, playing those 1 or 2 lineups in multiple entry GPP tournaments. I would play those 1 or 2 lineups in different single entry tournaments, or play 3 lineups in a 3 entry max tournament, because you want to have the same leverage to the field everybody else does. And in all honesty, it makes no sense in my mind to get into a large field GPP if you're not going to max enter it. And if you're not a member of our site, those people, I could care less what they do. I hope that many of them play 1 entry or 3 entries in large, because that's good for us. But you have to maximize your field leverage. And that is, you have 2 lineups and I've got 150. My chances of taking this down are way higher than yours are with your 2 entries. So if you're only going to play a couple of lineups, contest selection is extremely important. So you want to make sure that you're selecting the right contests first and foremost. So if you're a 2 to 5 or 10 entry type guy, play single entries with different lineups and play 3 entry maxes with different lineups. And give yourself, a more broad exposure, but at least you're matching and you have the same leverage to the field and the same chance to take it down that everybody else has. Don't get big eyes thinking that you've got the lottery ticket lineup tonight and your 1 entry is going to take down the $1 million. Could it happen? Anything can happen. But long term, are you going to be successful and make money doing that? You are not. You're going to lose money long term doing that. So the last thing I'll say about the stacking part to kind of close this out before we get into tonight's slate is, if you're going to stack and you're going to play a limited amount of lineups, that means that you have to be more conservative with the teams that you're going to stack. If you're going to play 1 lineup, then my recommendation would be to find a way to stack the top 2 implied run totals. And keep it no deeper than the top 5 implied run totals. If you feel that you want to be a little bit different, and let's just say, for example, tonight, the top implied run totals on the board tonight is Boston is at 6, Houston's at 5.8, the Dodgers are at 5.6, Philadelphia's at 5.3, Cleveland's at 5.2. So if I'm playing 1 entry tonight in a single entry tournament, I'm probably going to find a way to get exposure to Boston and Houston, or Boston and the Dodgers. And more realistically, I would probably do Boston, the Dodgers, so that I had some exposure to the later games on the slate, because that is rule number one for me as far as roster construction goes. If you don't have exposure to the last game on the slate, you're gonna get passed. And we can, on a different podcast, I can get into how to take advantage of that when you do, multiple lineup entries, when you're stacking up two teams that are at 7-10, as opposed to, how do you get exposure to the 10-10 game? There's some variance in that you can live with. If you're a single entry, 3-entry max guy, people want to watch their players play. The majority of the country lives not in the Western time zone. People like to watch their players play. They're going to load up the early games. They don't stay up late till 10 o'clock at night to watch the Angels and the A's, or the Dodgers and the Giants. So there's an ownership edge that can be had in getting that as well, and that's why it's always been rule number one for me. Going back to my days when I started daily fantasy, playing NFL, and in those days the Monday night game was part of the main slate, and I always moved up the board on Monday night and always had exposure in the Monday night game in some form or fashion, even if it was back when there was a kicking slot, even if it was just the kicker, because you're going to pass people because people's lineups have finished when the late games start. A lot of people's lineups have finished. So if you've got more questions on this, let me know in Discord. I can do maybe a whole strategy podcast just breaking down how to enter, how to choose contests, etc. from a strategy standpoint. Also, make sure you check out the tutorials that we do have already on the website. For cash games and multi-entry, etc. We've got tutorials up there as we speak. So let's get into today. Implied run totals. And I kind of like to pick the top 8 to talk about. Or if there's a team that sticks out to me a ton that, because of their implied run total, I don't agree with what their implied total is. I think it'll be different. And they're coming in low, and low implied run totals in MLB mean low ownership. So you always want to look to see if there's a lower implied run total that could outperform itself that people will not be on. And the first one to me is St. Louis at 4.6. I think St. Louis against Pittsburgh tonight is going to put up 6 to 8 runs. It's a good matchup for them as far as against the starting pitcher. Colorado and Texas, we don't have any idea what's going to go on yet. I do like Colorado. I mentioned them on our On Deck video this morning, but we don't know what the ballpark environment is going to be yet in Texas. Is a new ballpark. So number 1 is Boston at 6. Number 2 is Houston at 5.8. The Dodgers at 5.6. Philly at 5.3. And I think those 4 teams are the top 4 teams on the day. And they'll be the most popular 4 teams on the day. Cleveland at 5.2. They'll be a little under-owned. Minnesota at 4.7. I think they'll be lower owned, and probably rightfully so, going against Giolito. A lot of hype around the Chicago White Sox. San Diego at 4.7. Oakland at 4.7. The Rockies and Cardinals at 4.6. Texas and the Cubs round that out at 4.5 and 4.4, with the White Sox at 4.4. Everybody else is at 4 or lower. The lowest implied run total on the day is Seattle at 3.4, the Giants at 3.5. I do think the Giants could possibly outperform the 3.5. And Chris likes this stack today. I'm not on it today because I like St. Louis so much, and from a value standpoint, I don't know from a roster construction standpoint if you need to go that low for value today. So that's the implied run totals. Let's talk about pitchers and who's on this slate. This is how I have pitchers ranked right now. I've got Verlander as 1. I've got Nola 2. I've got Giolito 3. Flaherty 4. And Bieber 5. Those are the top 5 for me from a value standpoint. For your deeper tournament builds, I like Frankie Montas tonight. I think he's got 5 to 7 strikeout upside, possibly a quality start. I don't like Lance Lynn one bit. I just think Lance Lynn had too good of a year last year out of nowhere, and he's going to have to, for me, to invest in Lance Lynn, I'm going to have to see him come out and win a couple of games and look like Lance Lynn from last year. He closed the season out last year unbelievably well. I think he had 11 and 12 strikeouts in his last 2 starts. Another guy that I think is the ultimate GPP play today is Nathan Eovaldi. I mean, just an awful year last year, coming off the World Series win the year before, where he was unbelievable in the postseason. And he's got excellent stuff. He just didn't have the movement on the fastball last year that he'd had in previous years. So, his price tag is $7,100. He's had an extremely long break. They may be cautious with him. He may only be a 4-inning type guy, but listen, if he throws 60 pitches in 4 innings and he's the Eovaldi of 2 years ago, he can get you 6 to 7 strikeouts in 4 innings. And it's a young Baltimore team. So I think he's the ultimate GPP play. Giolito is a guy I think is going to be on the forefront of the Cy Young in the American League. Aaron Nola, I think, is the one spot that you can be contrarian and stack against him, but I do want to have some exposure to him, and I'm probably going to cap that exposure around 20%. I do think if you want to get really, really, really contrarian on the slate, I would build it, and you're building multiple lineups, I would build a couple with Miami against Nola, and I would use a VR and an Aguilar and some of these boys that are the top 5 spots in that lineup. I like Miami this year, and I've said this over and over again so far since we've been back. In the East, I just feel like it's going to be so competitive with those top couple of teams that a team like Miami, if they can beat up on the Mets and they can beat up on the Nationals, they're going to find themselves right in the thick of it. And there's a new playoff structure, right? There's 16 teams that are getting in this thing. 8 from each league. First place and second place from each division are in. And then after they've, all the 3rd, 4th, 5th place teams in each division, they'll be lined up, and the top 2 teams from there will be the wild cards. So it's really wide open. And I think Miami I think they've got the talent and the potential, and maybe not right out the gate tonight against Nola, but I would not rule out, if I'm building 150 lines, stacking against Nola in a couple of these with some of these Miami guys. First base, the catcher spot, I like Rhys Hoskins a lot. I love Max Muncy. Jose Abreu is finally, we've seen what Abreu's done for years with nobody really around him, and now he's got a ton around him. Paul Goldschmidt comes in on FanDuel only $3,500. Seems like a really, really good price tag. And Carlos Santana, $3,200 against Duffy, the switch hitter. We know what Carlos Santana has done over the course of his career, especially against left-handed pitching. That's kind of where I'm at there with the first base spot. Second base, Cesar Hernandez, this guy's $2,500. And he's leading off for Cleveland. They have a higher implied run total. Cleveland's a team that's going to, I think, go under-owned tonight against Duffy. And could he hit a home run? He could. Is he going to? Probably not. But can he get on, steal you a base, score a couple runs, walk? Absolutely he can, and those points all add up. And at $2,500, I think you can definitely go 2 to 3x his price tag with Duffy on the hill. Altuve is a little expensive for me at $3,800. I don't know if I want to pay up in that spot. Wilmer Flores is a good value play if you want to get one piece. But Tommy La Stella is my favorite play at second base at $2,700. Outside of Ketel Marte, who I think is going to be in the MVP hunt when this is all said and done this year. This guy, he's really focused. Really focused, and that kind of started last year. So, second base is not an exciting spot. It wasn't an exciting spot last night on that slate, but there are some spots. I know Steph likes Kipnis, but for me, I like Cesar Hernandez as a one-off play or as part of that Cleveland stack. Michael Chavis, we've seen what he can do. I'm not really interested in that. I'll probably pass on Chavis. If you were going to get a one-off play for value, Wilmer Flores at 2,100, he's a solid player. I think he's underpriced. But La Stella, to me, I like this spot for La Stella. It's a good price, and it's late game exposure as a one-off play. Kiki Hernandez is also out there. But that's kind of where I'm at with second base. Third base, I'm with the, look, there's three guys I love here. First of all, Matt Carpenter is 2,500. It's really cheap. Don't forget about Gene Segura. He's also coming back from an injury with McCutchen. He's hitting sixth. He's 2,900. I like this spot a lot for Segura. But Carpenter at 2,500, really good play. He's hitting fifth. It's been confirmed. Love Yoan Moncada at 3,200, hitting in the 2 spot. Those are kind of my favorite plays at the moment at third base. Shortstop. I didn't talk about Lindor. His price tag's $3,800. But if you're going to build a Cleveland stack, you have to start there with Lindor. Didi Gregorius, let's not forget that he's now in Philadelphia. You want to talk about a team that's flying under the radar with the Yankees and Dodgers. The Phillies are just as stacked. I mean, they get McCutchen back, they get Segura back, they add Didi Gregorius, they've got Rhys Hoskins. The list goes on and on with who's on this roster. It's a stacked roster. I also like Paul DeJong, 2,800. Carlos Correa, 3,200. I don't know how long his price tag stays at 3,200. I think it's pretty cheap. Corey Seager at 3,200. I like him also. And that's kind of, I'll round it out with Tim Anderson and Marcus Semien, Fernando Tatis. It's a really deep shortstop position, in my opinion, tonight. Outfielders. There are a ton of outfielders to like today. Starting with Benedetti at 2,700. We're talking about a guy who's been over 4,000 before. He's been a 37 to 4,100 player. He's, rarely will we get him down in the 32, 33, 3,100, but he's 2,700 a night. Chu, another guy, 2,700. Andrew McCutchen, another guy, 2,800. David Dahl, 2,900. Bryce Harper, sub 4,000 at 3,900. That feels like a bit of a deal right now. Some value guys like Ramon Laureano with Oakland and late game exposure like him. Joey Gallo's 3,500. I think Gallo's going to have a monster year. We just don't know how this ballpark's going to play. If it's going to play the same, I doubt it plays the same as the old Arlington Park played. Tommy Pham at 2,900. Jay Bruce confirmed, 2,100, hitting in the 7 spot with Segura in front of him. And Didi. And I like the way that lineup is constructed, because let's say it's a quick top of the first. Okay, well, you've got a couple leadoff guys, traditionally top of the order guys, and Segura and Didi, who are going to hit in front of Jay Bruce, who has double dong upside. So 2,100, really good price tag. I would make Bruce a part of my Philadelphia stacks for sure. Tommy Edman at 2,700. And Mookie Betts got his first hit last night as a Dodger, took the ball. I expect big things from Betts. Chris Davis, 2,700. I like all of these guys today if you're, kind of building mini stacks or to include them as part of a larger team stack. Now, one thing that I kind of go through before, wrapping up what we're going to do and making my recommendations for pitcher, or look at some of these peripheral stats that a lot of people, I think, ignore or don't have any idea that they exist. And some of these stats that I talk about are in our algorithm for our optimizer. So sometimes lineups, you could hop in the optimizer and like, whoa, who's it recommending? Well, it's on something because we've got it weighted a certain amount for ISO. And ISO, in my opinion, is the single best statistic to look at in terms of fantasy baseball. And if you're asking why, I'll tell you. ISO, simply explained, is doubles, triples, and home runs against a pitcher. Okay? And if you're a pitcher and you're under 150, you've got a good ISO against you. If you're a pitcher and there's an ISO against you above 200, that is a green light to stack against that pitcher. We also look at K percentage and K percentage against, etc., etc., etc. You do not want a guy who has a 17% K rate, and you want to compare what his price tag is. We're looking for a guy who's got a 23 to 27% K rate that is $7,500, because there's going to be 3 or 4 guys that are top tier guys, and people look at this as a cash game build, and they're like, oh, I want Justin Verlander tonight. Okay, what if there's a guy that's got, what if Verlander's K rate is 31%? Well, what if Frankie Montas at 7,500 is 29%? I'm going to gamble, and I'm going to put some Montas in my lineups because he could pay off on a point per dollar basis just as good as Verlander can, and I can stack bigger bats and not have to take value pieces to reach all the way up to get that pitcher. So these are things we'll look at throughout the season. The numbers as far as the pitching metrics go, we don't have any info for this season. This is the first full slate of the year. We can look at some stuff from last year, and when we look at Nola, for example, 162 ISO against left-handers, 159 ISO against right-handers. Nothing that is alarming there. On the other side of it, when you look at Alcantara, 173 ISO against lefties. Okay, that's something to me that is saying, okay, I know Philadelphia's got a higher implied run total. I know it's got a stacked lineup. I know I want to get some left-handed bats because he's got a 136 ISO against righties. Dig a little deeper into that, and his ground ball rate against righties is 49.4%. It's only 40% against lefties. Look at the K rate. 20.5% K rate against righties, 15.9% K rate against lefties. So you can see a trend start to build there. So now we're identifying, if I'm going to stack Philadelphia, I want to get exposure to some left-handed bats. Jay Bruce, who we just talked about, at extremely good value. Bryce Harper, right? These are the guys. We want to get some left-handed exposure because Alcantara, if there is a flaw with him, right, it is against the left-handed side of the plate. Fly ball percentage of 38% against left-handed bats, only 31% against right-handed bats. So Alcantara's first guy. We look at, when you look at the next game, which is Milwaukee and Chicago, look at ISO, 0.74 for Woodruff against righties, a 166 against lefties. If you wanted to stack against him, it would be like, Rizzo, maybe Schwarber, some of these other guys. But I'm not going to stack against him with Chicago tonight. On the flip side of it with Hendricks was good last year. And for me, Milwaukee's lineup is just it's not quite the same. I mean, Ryan Braun's hopeful. They add Justin Smoke. They've still got Lorenzo Cain leading it off. Yelich may be batting in the 2 spot. Keston Hiura, who had a really good year last year as a rookie. They add Asvel Garcia. But the bottom of this lineup with Sogard and Arcia and Navarez, there's not a lot of pop there. Their ISO numbers themselves, not very good. In comparison, let's talk about Arcia as a 123, Sogard 144. Yelich is 377 ISO. So, there's not a lot of pop in this lineup. So I'm not going to play Hendricks today, most likely, but I'm also not going to stack against him. Kansas City and Cleveland. Bieber. Is there a hole with Bieber? And it's against left-handed bats. Okay, so if you watched the video earlier, I mentioned some of these left-handed bats for Kansas City. That's, if I was going to go 1 off or 2 off, that's who I'd go with. 186 ISO to lefties, a 143 ISO to righties. So, that's kind of something to look at. But is Kansas City on an 11-game slate? No, if this was a 3-game slate, that's something I'd be looking at, right? But this is an 11-game slate. There's no reason for me to go here against Bieber only because he's got a 186 ISO against lefties. It's not high enough for me with that good of a pitcher to set off an alarm. Next game, we'll look at Baltimore and Boston. and you've got Eovaldi. Now here's the deal, right? Let's take a look at where you can, if you're going to stack Baltimore, which I think a lot of people are today, you've got Santander, who's a switch hitter. You've got Chris Davis, who I think everybody will avoid like the plague. Rianutu Ruiz and Stewart. Those are the left-handed / switch hitters in the lineup. Why am I bringing them up? Eovaldi last year had a 146 ISO against right-handed bats, a 23.1 K percentage, a ground ball rate of 49.5%. What do you do against lefties? 331 ISO. 331 ISO. Only a 38.5% ground ball rate. So much different. So where did Eovaldi struggle? He struggled against left-handed bats. So who am I going to load up if I'm going to stack Baltimore? Well, I get some exposure to Hayes. Yes, he's leading off, and there's a lot of good things to talk about in terms of Hayes. But I want some Santander, and I want some Chris Davis, and I want some Ruiz. Maybe even Stewart at the bottom of it. Is there a chance that we see a dong tonight from Chris Davis? I mean, if it's the old Eovaldi, right? Terrible against left-handed bats last year. Terrible. So on the flip side of this game, for Baltimore, Tommy Milone. And he's just bad across the board. 294 ISO against lefties and a 222 ISO against righties. Carte blanche with this lineup. I do like Kevin Pillar quite a bit. Xander Bogaerts, he's going to have to pick up some slack. JD Martinez is JD Martinez. And Benedetti's very cheap. You can include Chavis also in that if you want. You still got Devers there. It's still a decent lineup. But you can see why Boston is got a high implied run total. Tommy Milone got whipped by both sides of the plate. He does strike out lefties at a higher clip than righties. 26.7 against lefties and 18.2 against righties. But all of the power metrics, it's much, much, much higher against the left-handed bats. 294 ISO against him for lefties, 222 for righties. Moving on, Colorado at Texas. German Marquez. 149 ISO against righties and a 216 ISO against lefties. The 216, I told you, look, the benchmark is 200. If it's over 200, it's kind of a red light. So, Chu, Gallo, Odor, that three-man stack, if you want to include Danny Santana in that, he's cheap. He's a switch hitter. That would kind of be the four guys I focus my stack around. If it's going to be exposure to getting the Rangers stack. 28% K rate to righties, a 20.4% K rate against lefties. But Marquez is a guy that I'm expecting big things from this year. I think Marquez is going to have a decent year. He closed the season out very, very strong. And I think that he's got a lot of upside. Very lively arm. And it's a guy I think he's going to have a pretty good year this year, especially with all the games in the division. I think that he'll have a really solid year. And again, we have no clue how this ballpark is going to play. We just don't have any clue. And that's something we're just going to have to learn and kind of see how the season progresses. So moving on, actually on the other side of this is Lance Lynn. And Lance Lynn, if he had a problem last year, it was against righties, kind of a reverse splits type of guy. So 175 ISO against righties, a 119 ISO against lefties, and the righties are kind of who we want anyways if we're stacking this up, at least the two core pieces of Trevor Story and Nolan Arenado. And who you fill in around that stack, to me, you start looking at Tapia and Dahl and Blackman. I know that Chris likes Walters. We both like Tapia, but to me, the core of this is Story and Arenado, and part of that reason is the 175 ISO against righties, and those are two power-hitting players in Story and Arenado. Dahl, yeah, he can hit out of the ballpark. Tapia, I guess he can too. but they're lefties that are not even close in power numbers to what Story and Arenado are. Blackman can definitely give it a ride, but the ISO numbers tell me that the core of this is going to be Story and it's going to be Arenado. Minnesota at Chicago. I just don't know, how last night kind of put me off a little bit, but Giolito is sub 150 ISO numbers against both sides of the plate. Not a guy I want to stack against. Berrios is 155 to righties and 152 to lefties. The dud tonight could be Chicago. There's so much excitement around the White Sox. It's a really good lineup. It's going to be a really tough and deep lineup. Berrios has been really good. I think I finished second or third in the opening day GPP last year, and I told everybody on this very podcast to load Berrios up against Cleveland because Cleveland was injured, and they had guys not Lindor wasn't in the lineup, Santana wasn't in the lineup, and people don't typically pay attention and know all of the moves and stuff that's happened when the season starts. And Berrios went out, I think, struck out 8 or 10 in the opening game, and we did really well. But I'm not going to stack too heavily against Berrios, and I'm definitely not going to stack against Giolito tonight. I get the play, but on this slate, I just not going to go there. Pittsburgh at St. Louis, and Joe Musgrove is on the hill with a 219 ISO against lefties. That's Edman, Wong, Carpenter, Fowler, all switch hitters who will hit left-handed against him. And I wasn't high on St. Louis when we started to roll the content back out, but over the last couple days, as I've looked at this lineup, what I did say was, who's going to protect Paul Goldschmidt? That's going to be the big question. But I like DeJong. I think he's a really good young player. Matt Carpenter, I think, was not 100% healthy last year and had a tough year. I think he rebounds from that. Edman, a really good young player. Colton Wong, really good young player. Dexter Fowler still there. Yadi Molina, professional hitter. Tyler O'Neill can hit, and Harrison Bader both show they can hit the ball out of the ballpark. So I like this team. I'll have no Musgrove with the ISO numbers, and only a 19% K percentage against right-handers. The flip side of this, Flaherty, 135 ISO to righties, 151 ISO to lefties. This guy dominates right-handed bats, 34.9 K percentage. You take a look at the lineup. Reynolds is a switch hitter. Frazier's a left-hander. Bell's a switch hitter. Moran's a left-hander. And Dyson's a left-hander. He's going to face, 5 left-handed bats. Am I okay with that? 25.0 K percent, only a 151 ISO, a 267 WOBA. 25% K rate is lovely. I'll take it. I think that, the potential for a quality start and 6 to 7 strikeouts in this lineup, I don't think that's out of the question. So, Flaherty definitely on the list here. Arizona at San Diego. And Chris Paddock. He is a much better pitcher against righties than he is lefties. Okay? The K percentage is at 22.8 last year against lefties, 30.2 against righties. You take a look at the lineup, and he's going to face Calhoun, Marte, Escobar, Peralta, Lamb, and in that group, Starling Marte is the only right-handed bat. So there's going to be a lot of left-handed at-bats at the top of this lineup. And then, if Lamb bats 8th or 9th, that kind of turns it back over. So there's not a run of righties he's going to get to face here. He has a much higher K percentage against right-handers of 30.2% than he did against lefties last year at 23.8%. He also walked lefties at a higher clip than he did righties. So Paddock, I think, is a really good young pitcher. I'm not going to have any exposure to Paddock tonight. I don't see the need to. I like Montas a little bit better. Seattle at Houston. I mean, these numbers here, and with Verlander, I'm going to explain something. There's a time and a place to stack against Verlander. because the ISO numbers last year were high, and the ISO numbers I'm going to give you came down from above 220 against both sides of the plate. First, he ends the season last year with a 197 ISO to righties and a 180 ISO to lefties. That's close enough for me to want to stack against Verlander, depending on who he is facing. And the reason the ISO numbers are so high for Verlander is because he's a power pitcher. And he's going to give up, when solid contact is made against a power pitcher, it's going to be loud contact. It's not going to be soft contact. The majority of his contact, if you look, 43.3% of his contact to lefties is hard. 39.3% of it against righties is hard. The soft contact, only 14.2% to lefties and 19.3% to righties, meaning hard to medium contact is the majority of the contact against Verlander, and that's because he throws hard. The K numbers, 39% against lefties, 31.6% against righties. This is not the team to stack up, but if I'm going to get any exposure to the Seattle side of it, it's going to be Seager. Because I think that Seager can run into one. Power on power. I think he can run into one. The Seattle side of this thing, Marco Gonzalez, it's just like with Verlander. There's a time and a place to use him. Like there's a time and a place to stack against Verlander. There's a time and a place to use Marco Gonzalez. Today's not it. And I'm just going to leave that there. The Dodgers and Giants tonight. You don't need to get any exposure to either one of these guys. I don't even think I'm going to go into what they did last year. Last game of the night is the Angels and the A's. And you look at Haney. And here's why I love the A's, and they're my favorite stack of the night. 226 ISO to lefties and a 196 ISO to righties. Good K numbers, 27.5% to lefties, 29.2% to righties. Average exit velocity against him from both sides of the plate is above 90. The ground ball percentage is below 40. That's an alarm. Against righties, the fly ball percentage is 44%. Hard contact against lefties is 50.8% of the time and 46.7% of the time to righties. I love Oakland, and I don't care who it is, 1 through 9 in this lineup. I want exposure to it. Their lineup's deep. Simeon, Laureano, Chapman, Olsen, Davis, Canna, Piscotty, Pender. All of those guys can hit the ball out of the ballpark. And when you talk about ISO, let's talk about the hitting standpoint for a second. Simeon, 230. Laureano, 216. Chapman, 279. Olsen, 255. Davis, 254. Canna, 229. Piscotty, 267. Two guys in this lineup have an ISO against left-handed pitching below 200. And every single one of those guys I just mentioned has a WOBA above 300. With Piscotty with a 421 WOBA against left-handed pitching. If you're looking for Ks in this lineup from Haney, you're going to have to look to Murphy, Pender, maybe Matt Olson, and Raul Laureano, and they're all below 22%. So I love this Oakland Athletics stack against Haney. Montas, on the other hand, 141 ISO against lefties and a 127 ISO against righties. The game's in Oakland. It's going to be cold. If you're not from California, then you have no idea that it's like 100 degrees during the day and it's like 59 degrees at night. We have huge temperature swings. We also get fog. Wet, cool, damp air. So, you got a guy on the hill who's got a 29.2 K percentage against lefties, a 22.5% K percentage against righties, the walk percentage below 6 against each side of the plate, a 60.3% ground ball rate to righties, 40% to lefties. His price tag on FanDuel feels borderline highway robbery. Love Montas, love the A's. So that wraps up pitching. I went all the way through it today. I won't go all the way through it every day. The reason for that is I wanted to give you kind of a full breakdown of how each day I look at the slate. My favorite pitcher tonight on this slate may be Frankie Montas. Dollar for dollar, I think he may be able to pay off somewhat close to Verlander, who's a top pitcher on the slate. But, you know, Giolito, Berrios, Nola, Bieber, Flaherty, Verlander, we don't know how many innings they're going to pitch tonight. And we're really going to be dependent on the strikeout. Verlander has the most strikeout upside. I think Flaherty and Bieber are right behind that. You look at Nola, I think it's a pesky matchup. You look at Giolito, I think it's a pesky matchup. And remember what I said with the ISOs. That's where we want to look, and that's kind of the holes we're looking to expose. I'll be back on Monday. I may throw one up tomorrow, but Monday for sure. Until then, be cool. Keep it cashing. Peace out.